In our headlines on this Tuesday, March 11th, here in South Korea, U.S. President Donald Trump does not reject the reality that his tariffs may result in a recession, and the stance sparks a fierce sell-off on Wall Street that sees the U.S. stock market losing substantial ground on Monday. Meanwhile, here in South Korea, acting President Cho Sang-mok presides over the 10th session of the Population Emergency Response Meeting aimed at boosting the birth rate and bolstering the support framework for an aging society. And the Constitutional Court has yet to disclose a date for its ruling on the impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol, and while many had initially believed a verdict would be delivered this coming Friday, some are now speculating the court's ruling may take place next week. Wall Street tumbled on Monday as investors responded sharply to concerns about a possible recession following remarks by U.S. President Donald Trump to Fox News on Sunday. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryun reports.
Wall Street saw an ocean of red as investors began selling their shares as soon as financial markets opened Monday amid heightened fears of a U.S. recession. The benchmark S&P 500 shed 2.7%, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq showed its biggest drop in more than 2 years as it slumped by 4%. Big tech stocks, including Apple and Microsoft, both members of the so-called Magnificent Seven, were at the center of the selling. Tesla plummeted by more than 15%, while chip giant Nvidia fell by more than 5%. Outside of stocks, Bitcoin also slipped below the $80,000 mark, returning to levels before Trump's inauguration. Comments made by U.S. President Donald Trump in an interview with Fox News on Sunday, when asked about whether he expects a recession this year, stoked market concerns.
There is a period of transition because what we're doing is very big. We're bringing wealth back to America. That's a big thing. And there are always periods of, it takes a little time.
Experts say that the risk of recession is something that Washington is viewing as a necessary evil for the greater good, and they say that this is reflected in Trump's blasé response to recession fears.
These are things that they're willing to accept for that longer term, more stable, more self-reliant, stronger position for the U.S.
And this was supported by the White House on Monday, as its economic advisor Kevin Hassett pushed back on talks of a recession while calling a potential contraction a very temporary phenomenon. He backed Trump's tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China, claiming that the measures would bring jobs and manufacturing back to the U.S. This comes amid heightened uncertainty around the Trump administration's on-again, off-again tariff policies, with levies on Mexico and Canada pushed back yet again to April 2nd for goods under the free trade agreement between the U.S. and the two neighboring countries. With the U.S. set to impose another wave of tariffs on steel and aluminium starting Wednesday, eyes are on how markets will respond. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And against that backdrop, Goldman Sachs has slashed its economic growth forecast for the U.S. to 1.7% this year from an earlier outlook of 2.4%. The downward revision has been linked to rampant concerns that the Trump administration's tariff campaign would weaken the U.S. economy. Now, just last quarter, the American economy grew 2.3%, tangibly slower than the 3.1% growth posted in the third quarter of 2024. In other news, Ukraine says North Korean soldiers have been actively engaged in counter-offensive operations alongside their Russian counterparts in the Kursk region. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
Ukraine's top military commander Alexander Syrsky said Monday that North Korean soldiers have taken part in Russian military counteroffensives to recapture territory in Kursk lost to Ukrainian forces. According to Reuters and AFP, General Syrsky said on social media that a significant number of Russian troops, supported by North Korean soldiers, went on the offensive, but suffered significant losses in troops and equipment. The comments come amid reports that the Russian military has been successful in its counteroffensive against Ukraine in the Kursk region after the U.S. cut off military support for Kyiv. The Russian military also claimed that it had recaptured a number of villages in the Kursk region. Meanwhile, high-level meetings will be held in Saudi Arabia between officials from the United States and Ukraine this week. Ukrainian diplomatic and military leaders will hold talks with U.S. officials on Tuesday. This includes U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who expressed confidence that the talks with Kyiv will lead to a positive outcome, but insists Ukraine needs to make concessions. Rubio also stressed that while Russia cannot conquer all of Ukraine, it'll be very difficult for Ukraine in any reasonable time period to get back territory lost to Moscow since 2014. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump's envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, is set to visit Moscow for a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to sources familiar with the matter, the visit comes as the administration looks to secure a ceasefire. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And North Korea has resumed its tough rhetoric against South Korea's annual military training with the U.S., while making no mention of its launch of multiple missiles into the West Sea Monday afternoon. Our defense correspondent Bae Eun-ji has more.
North Korea on Monday fired what are presumed to have been multiple close-range ballistic missiles from an inland area called Hwangju County toward waters off its west coast. But the regime's state media has remained silent about the launch, even the day after. North Korea typically acknowledges its ballistic missile launches the following morning through state media, often framing them as test firings. However, this time it has made no mention of the launch. Instead, the Korean Central News Agency criticized the ongoing South Korea-U.S. combined military exercise, which kicked off on Monday, labeling it a confrontational war rehearsal. It also denounced the annual drills as a dangerous provocative act. Experts say that the regime's intention may be to show, on one hand, its muscularity, while on the other hand taking a slightly quieter tone about the missiles themselves.
The fact that North Korea launched ballistic missiles in line with the start of South Korea and the United States military exercise shows that the regime was not lying when it previously warned it would retaliate against these drills. Nevertheless, responding to a large-scale combined military exercise with close-range missiles suggests an intention for a certain level of restraint.
Because the North's latest launch was the first of its kind since the start of Trump's second presidency, pundits also believe this may suggest that the regime is open to talks with the United States.
By going ahead and launching, they show strength from their perspective. In refraining from too much mention, they provide some wiggle room should the Trump administration approach them and try to open doors in terms of talks.
Following the North's launch, the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command issued a statement calling on Pyongyang to refrain from further unlawful and destabilizing acts. It reaffirmed that Washington's commitments to the defense of South Korea and Japan remain strong. The European Union also denounced the launch, saying that it threatens regional security, heightens tensions, and violates UN Security Council resolutions. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
And South Korea has tentatively agreed to establish diplomatic relations with Syria, which is the only UN member state that Seoul has yet to forge ties with. Now, this is according to the Foreign Ministry here on this Tuesday, adding that related protocols are underway. Early last month, ministry officials were in Syria and met with authorities there to discuss prospects of official ties. Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Shara took power after bringing an end to Bashar al-Assad and his family's half-century-long dictatorship last December. The 10th discussion on Korea's demographic concerns took place earlier this afternoon, presided over by Acting President Choi Sang-mok. Our Lee Soo-jin covers this latest talks on boosting Korea's birth rate and bolstering the support framework for an aging society.
South Korea is moving to ramp up investment in the age-tech sector and benefits for families with children to tackle the nation's demographic challenges. These plans were announced following the 10th session of the Population Emergency Response meeting held on Tuesday, led by Acting President Choi Sang-mok.
The recovery of delayed marriages and childbirth due to COVID-19 is largely due to the urgent efforts of various sectors. The government will focus on maintaining the momentum of the rebounding birth rate and strengthening its response to low birth rates.
The nation's total fertility rate, the average number of children a woman is expected to have in her lifetime, rose for the first time in 9 years to 0.75 last year, after it fell to its lowest annual figure of 0.72 in 2023. But the country continues to age, as in December last year, South Korea became a super-aged society, with people aged 65 or older making up more than 20% of the total population. The age tech market, where advanced technology is integrated into products designed for the elderly, as a result, is expected to grow significantly. To support this growth, the government plans to launch a 300 billion Korean won, or around $206 million project focused on developing 5 key age tech areas: care robots, wearable and digital medical devices, treatments for age-related diseases, anti-aging and regenerative medicine, and smart home care. And it will also establish more than 2,000 smart senior care centers, in addition to the more than 2,300 already in operation, where the elderly can utilize age tech devices. The government is also moving to increase benefits for families with children. For newlywed couples and families with children, the income limit to qualify for public rental housing will be raised from 100% to 130% of the average monthly income for single-income households, and from 120% to 200% for dual-income households, enabling more families to benefit. Multi-child families will also have access to priority screening services not only at Incheon Airport but also at Jeju, Gimhae, and Gimpo airports. 이수진, Arirang News.
The Constitutional Court has yet to disclose a date for its ruling on the impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol, and while many had initially believed a verdict would be delivered this coming Friday, some are now speculating that the court's ruling may take place next week. Our political correspondent Shin Ha-young tells us why.
It's been 2 weeks since the final hearing in President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment trial, but the Constitutional Court has not yet announced a date for its ruling. Given that previous presidential impeachment rulings were made about 2 weeks after the final hearing, many expected the ruling to be this Friday. However, since the court decided to deliver impeachment verdicts on the chief state auditor and 3 top prosecutors on Thursday, expectations are rising that the ruling on Yoon could be delayed until next week. There is no precedent for the courts delivering major rulings on consecutive days. Ahead of Yoon's verdict, police are considering banning the release of stored firearms to prevent potential attacks. The National Police Agency said it's reviewing refusing to release firearms stored at police stations used to kill dangerous wild animals. Under the current law, licensed gun owners must store their firearms at police stations and only take them out to hunt down wild boars or birds. On the day of the ruling, police will designate parts of Seoul's Jongno-gu and Junggu districts near the Constitutional Court as special crime prevention zones to maintain safety and manage crowds. Vehicle barriers will be set up within 100 meters of the court. During a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, Acting President Choi Sang-mok expressed concern about possible national division and conflict over the presidential impeachment ruling.
The government will respond firmly according to the law, with zero tolerance for any illegal or violent protests, as well as any acts that challenge public authority.
Meanwhile, the main opposition Democratic Party began its sit-in protest at Gwanghwamun Square on Tuesday, calling for Yoon's removal, while the ruling People Power Party decided not to stage any demonstrations to pressure the court. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
And as mentioned in that report, the political fates of the chairman of the Board of Audit and Inspection, Choi Jae-hae, and the chief of the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office, Lee Chang-soo, as well as 2 other prosecutors, will be announced by the Constitutional Court this coming Thursday. The impeachment motions against these 4 public officials were passed unilaterally by the opposition-led parliament early last December. The prosecutors are accused of failing to properly investigate alleged crimes related to First Lady Kim Gun-hee, while the head of the audit agency is accused of mishandling the inspection on the relocation of the top office from Cheongwadae to Yongsan. Findings for the first 10 days of March show an uptick in exports driven by cars and ships. According to the Korea Customs Service, exports amounted to $13.9 billion during this period, up 2.9% on year. By region, Korean exports to the U.S. market rose 5.5%, while those to the EU jumped 6.8%. By product, meanwhile, semiconductors saw their share in total exports shrink slightly. Samsung's Galaxy S25 Ultra topped U.S. magazine Consumer Reports' latest review. In the magazine's smartphone evaluation for March, the Galaxy S25 Ultra scored the highest in various categories, including camera, display, and durability. Similarly, the Samsung smartphone was selected as the best by consumer associations in European and Nordic countries, such as the UK, Italy, and Sweden. An unlikely encounter between Korea's traditional court music and artificial intelligence offers audiences the chance to indulge in the lost lyrics of the past. Our Yoon explains.
The royal processional music of the Joseon-era kings as they departed from and returned to their palaces will be performed on stage at the Yeakdang Hall of the National Kugak Center in Seoul. The royal processional music of the Joseon dynasty followed a specific format, starting with 출궁악 for when the king leaves the palace, then 행악 for during the procession, 환궁악 is played upon his return, and finally 연례악 banquet music is performed after his arrival at the palace.
Under the title 행악 and 보호자, Steps of Heaven and Earth, it's less a restoration and more a three-dimensional production of the royal family's elegant yet brilliant processional court music.
보호자, a repertoire of Korean court music, sings of a peaceful reign. But the last of its three parts only survived as an instrumental piece. In this production, AI was used to generate new verses. AI models were trained on 350 of Crown Prince Hyo-myung's works, one of the most prolific Hansi poets of the Joseon era. They were cross-referenced with over 100 poems by scholars Chung Yak-yong and Kim Jung-hee for the newly composed lyrics.
The old books of poems written with brushes were digitized. After all the Chinese characters were processed, old Korean translation samples were also collected and input.
보호자 is performed in Korean traditional opera, telling the story of King Sejo, the seventh monarch of the Joseon dynasty, and Prince Anpyeong, who was sacrificed as a victim of King Sejo's lust for power.
27 years after the Gyu-jongnan coup, where did Mushim, the daughter of Anpyeong, go? Perhaps pacing around her father's traces.
The fundamental rhythm and scales are based on traditional music, but the complicated sounds in between have been removed to bring a so-called ballad-style pansori expected to be more widely received by the audience.
We follow the more simple flow of the traditional sounds, but the complicated sounds in between, that even I can't relate to, have been taken out.
Led by young director Kim Jung, who has been garnering attention in the theater industry, experienced singers will be staging The Life of Remorse at the National Kugak Center in Seoul on March 13th and 14th. 이은진, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. Off the east coast of England, an oil tanker and a cargo ship have collided, leading to fires and environmental concerns due to leaking fuel. On Monday, the U.S.-flagged oil tanker Stena Immaculate and the Portuguese-flagged cargo vessel Solong collided in the North Sea near the Humber estuary. The Stena Immaculate, anchored at the time and carrying jet fuel for the U.S. military, suffered ruptured cargo tanks after the collision, resulting in explosions and a subsequent fire. The Solong, reportedly transporting sodium cyanide, also caught fire. Emergency response teams rescued 36 individuals from both vessels. One person was taken to the hospital and one person is reportedly missing. Experts are currently assessing the environmental impact of the collision, noting that while the leaking jet fuel evaporates more quickly than crude oil, the potential release of sodium cyanide presents additional risks. Greenland is set to hold its parliamentary election on Tuesday local time, attracting significant international attention due to recent comments by U.S. President Donald Trump regarding his interest in acquiring the world's largest island. Greenland's electorate will vote to fill all 31 seats in the parliament on Tuesday. Approximately 40,500 of Greenland's 57,000 residents are eligible to vote, and some Greenlanders cast early ballots on Monday. The election's central issue is whether it should pursue independence from Denmark, as the island remains a self-governing territory of the country. Recent statements by U.S. President Donald Trump proposing that Greenland could join the United States have intensified this debate. The election's outcome is unpredictable, with Greenlanders emphasizing their right to self-determination amid external pressures. In Guatemala, the country's volcano of fire, located 53 kilometers from the capital, Guatemala City, erupted on Sunday night local time, prompting authorities to evacuate almost 300 families and caution that an additional 30,000 residents could be at risk. The 3,763-meter volcano, among Central America's most active, expelled gas and ash high into the atmosphere, leading to the closure of nearby schools and a major roadway connecting local communities. Emergency services are on high alert and are closely monitoring the situation. An eruption in 2018 killed over 190 people and left approximately 230 missing. In India's northern city of Varanasi, a major Hindu pilgrimage town, people celebrated Holi, the festival of colors that signifies the arrival of spring and the triumph of good over evil. The devotees, drenched in colored powder, enjoyed cultural performances as they immersed themselves in the festival spirit at a temple for Hindus. Festivities of Holi reached their peak on March 13th and 14th. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
Warm weather that feels like late March to early April continued during the day today. However, in this whole metropolitan area, the first high concentration fine dust emergency reduction measures of this spring are implemented until tonight. In addition, ultrafine dust warnings were issued in southwestern Gyeonggi-do province, including Incheon and Suwon. This stuffy air is expected to continue until Thursday, especially in the center parts of the country, including Seoul. In addition to the stagnant atmosphere, there will be additional smoke from overseas tomorrow night. There is a possibility that yellow dust will gradually be added to the dusty air. Tomorrow morning will start mild all over the country, with Seoul at 6 degrees Celsius and Gwangju at 7 degrees. Highs will move up to 13 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, 18 degrees in Gyeongju. In the second half of the week, it will be as warm as mid-April, with Seoul rising up to 17 degrees. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up now is our daily panel session. Do stay with us.